For centuries, few writings have stirred as much debate in Christianity as the Gnostic Gospels. These mysterious books claim to uncover hidden parts of the story that never became part of the Bible. They tell of an unexpected connection between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and even suggest that Judas Iscariot may have played a very different role than most people imagine. Believed to have disappeared for hundreds of years, their rediscovery sparked fresh questions about the earliest days of Christianity and offered an extraordinary glimpse into an ancient movement known as Gnosticism. In this video, Faithful Jesus will explore what these forgotten writings actually contain and why they were ultimately left out of the Bible. Gnostic Christianity is one of the most challenging movements in early Christian history to explain. It was never a single organized church or united group with one official set of beliefs. Instead, it consisted of several different communities connected by one central idea. They believed they possessed hidden spiritual knowledge about Jesus that ordinary believers did not have. The word Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. To many Gnostics, salvation was not achieved simply through faith or righteous living. They believed it came through receiving secret knowledge about God, humanity, and the true nature of existence. These beliefs were preserved in a collection of writings commonly called the Gnostic Gospels. Many of these texts present themselves as private conversations in which Jesus shares secret teachings with a small circle of trusted followers. To understand why these books appeared, we have to return to the very beginning of Christianity.
After the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, his followers spread across the Mediterranean world, forming the first Christian communities. As time passed, however, the people who had personally known Jesus began to grow older and die. With every passing generation, first-hand memories of his life became more difficult to preserve. To protect these accounts for future believers, Christians began recording what they had witnessed or learned from eyewitnesses. Among the earliest writings were biographies proclaiming the good news of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. These eventually became the four Gospels recognized in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These four books quickly became the foundation for teaching about Jesus throughout the early church. For Christians who had never met him personally, they served as the most trusted record of his words and actions. At the same time, other writings also began to circulate. Some claimed to reveal hidden events from Jesus' life or secret teachings intended only for a chosen few. Many of these writings are now known as the Gnostic Gospels. For centuries, scholars knew these books had once existed because early Christian writers referred to them, but almost all of the texts themselves had vanished. Their contents remained a mystery until an astonishing discovery in the 20th century changed everything. In 1945, an Egyptian farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was searching for fertilizer near the cliffs outside the town of Nag Hammadi. While digging, he uncovered a large sealed clay jar that appeared to have been carefully hidden long ago. Curious, and hoping it contained treasure, he broke it open. Instead of gold or jewels, he found 12 leather-bound books along with part of a 13th manuscript.
Although the writing inside remained clear, it was written in a language unfamiliar to him. Not realizing the importance of his discovery, he carried the books home. According to later accounts, his mother even burned part of one manuscript to help fuel the household fire. It is remarkable that any of these ancient books survived at all. Afterward, the manuscripts reportedly made their way through the black market, and for years their whereabouts remained uncertain. Then, in 1951, one of the codices unexpectedly appeared at the Carl Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland. It had been purchased as a birthday gift for the renowned psychologist Carl Jung. Scholars began translating the manuscript and discovered it was written in Coptic, the final stage of the ancient Egyptian language. Evidence suggested it was likely copied from an even older Greek original. Eventually, this codex was reunited with the other manuscripts, which had come into the possession of the Egyptian government. During the 1960s, historians and biblical scholars were finally given access to study the entire collection. What they uncovered was astonishing. Although these writings clearly used Christian names, themes, and characters, they presented beliefs and teachings that were dramatically different from those found in the four Gospels of the New Testament. Instead, these writings presented a completely different understanding of Christianity, one that many believed had disappeared long ago. For the first time, scholars were able to study an entire collection of Gnostic texts and explore the beliefs of this forgotten tradition. The discovery at Nag Hammadi is often described as a library, and that comparison fits well. Just as a modern library contains many different books, each manuscript offers its own ideas and perspective, yet together they reveal the beliefs, questions, and spiritual outlook of the community that preserved them. So where do we begin with such an extraordinary collection? The best place is at the very beginning, with the Gnostic story of creation. Among the most significant writings found at Nag Hammadi is the Apocryphon of John. It presents itself as a hidden revelation connected to the Bible and retells the story of creation found in Genesis. But this version introduces one shocking idea that sets it apart from traditional Christianity. What if the creator of the physical world was not the highest God at all? The writers of this text looked at certain stories in the Old Testament where God sends the flood, judges entire nations, and strikes down Egypt's firstborn, and they struggled to reconcile those accounts with the loving and merciful God revealed through Jesus in the New Testament. Their answer was bold. They argued that these were not the same divine being. According to Gnostic belief, there are two distinct gods. The first is a lower creator deity responsible for the material universe, while above him exists the true and perfect God, an invisible, eternal spirit who exists beyond time, space, and the physical world. This lesser creator is known as the demiurge, often identified by the name Yaldabaoth. The Apocryphon of John explains how this being came into existence through a dramatic cosmic story. Before anything existed, before the universe, before time itself, there was only the great invisible spirit. This perfect source of light was beyond human understanding, eternal and complete. Then, in a mysterious act beyond human comprehension, the Great Spirit brought forth another divine being known as Barbello, who became the first expression of creation and the mother of all that followed. Together, the great invisible spirit and Barbello produced a series of divine beings called eons. These radiant beings reflected different aspects of the divine nature, almost like rays of light shining from a single source. They lived together in a perfect spiritual realm known as the pleroma, a place untouched by darkness or imperfection. As more eons came into being, the final one was Sophia, whose name means wisdom. Unlike the others, Sophia desired to create independently, acting without the approval of the great invisible spirit. Her decision produced something entirely unexpected, a being that lacked the fullness of divine light. The result was Yaldabaoth, a terrifying creature described with the face of a lion, the body of a serpent, and blazing eyes like flashes of lightning. Because he was flawed and impure, he could not remain in the perfect realm of the pleroma. Instead, he was cast into the darkness below. Filled with arrogance, Yaldabaoth believed he alone possessed supreme authority. Declaring himself the only God, he began creating the physical universe, forming the heavens, the earth, and everything within them. To help govern this new world,
He created 7 powerful rulers known as the archons, each portrayed with the head of a different animal. Yet despite all their efforts, their creation remained empty and lifeless. To solve this problem, Yaldabaoth took a spark of divine light and placed it within the first human, Adam. That single spark became humanity's connection to the higher spiritual realm, the only trace of true divinity.
Hidden inside a corrupt material world. But Yaldabaoth soon became afraid. He realized that if humanity ever discovered its true origin, people would no longer remain under his control or recognize him as their creator. To keep Adam spiritually asleep, he placed him in a beautiful garden, filled with pleasure and distraction, hoping he would never seek the truth. Meanwhile, in the Pleroma, Sophia mourned the consequences of her creation and longed to rescue humanity from Yaldabaoth's deception. She knew there was still a way to awaken the divine spark hidden within mankind. That opportunity came through the tree of knowledge. Sophia brought Eve into existence to stand beside Adam. When Eve ate from the tree, her understanding was opened. She then shared the fruit with Adam, and together they awakened to the truth, realizing that their deepest identity came not from Yaldabaoth, but from the higher divine realm beyond the material universe. Filled with anger, Yaldabaoth cast Adam and Eve out of the garden. From that point on, humanity remained trapped in a world of deception, held captive by ignorance and false worship. Yet there was one thing he could never take away: the divine spark hidden within every person. Though buried deep inside, that spark would remain alive until a Savior arrived to awaken it and reveal the path back to the Pleroma, the perfect realm of the true God. Different versions of this creation story appear throughout Gnostic literature, but the Apocryphon of John captures many of the central beliefs shared by these writings. At its heart, the story tries to answer one of humanity's oldest questions. If God is perfectly good, why does evil exist? The Gnostics offered an answer that was as bold as it was controversial. They argued that the creator of the material world was not the highest God at all. This belief shaped their entire understanding of creation. In their view, the flawless spiritual realm of the great invisible spirit was corrupted by Yaldabaoth, whose pride and ignorance gave rise to the imperfect physical universe. Humanity, they believed, now lived under the rule of this false creator. If the story sounds familiar, that's because many of Yaldabaoth's actions closely resemble those of God in the book of Genesis. The difference is that, in Gnostic thought, these same actions are interpreted very differently. Rather than being the true creator, Yaldabaoth is portrayed as an arrogant ruler who keeps humanity spiritually blind and separated from its divine origin. Another important feature of this myth is its view of human nature. Even though people live in a broken material world, every individual carries a fragment of divine light within. The purpose of life is to awaken that hidden spark, remember where we truly came from, and return to the perfect presence of the true God in the Pleroma. According to the Gnostics, this awakening comes through secret spiritual knowledge. But who would reveal that hidden truth? Who would show humanity how to escape the prison of the material world? To answer that question, we have to look at how the Gnostics understood Jesus. If you've seen the science fiction film The Matrix, you may remember the moment when Morpheus tells Neo that the world around him is nothing more than an illusion hiding the truth. One biblical scholar has observed that this idea sounds remarkably similar to themes found throughout Gnostic writings. Just as Morpheus awakens Neo to reality, the Gnostic Jesus is presented as the one who opens humanity's eyes to the truth hidden behind the visible world. With that in mind, let's explore one of the most famous Gnostic writings ever discovered. The Gospel of Thomas is unlike any of the 4 New Testament Gospels. It claims to have been written by Didymus Judas Thomas, whose name contains an interesting detail. Both Didymus and Thomas mean twin in different languages. Unlike Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, this book tells no story. There is no account of Jesus' birth, miracles, crucifixion, or resurrection. Instead, it consists entirely of 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. The opening statement immediately captures attention by promising that anyone who understands these sayings will overcome death. As scholars examined the text, they noticed something unexpected. Nearly two-thirds of its sayings closely resemble teachings found in the New Testament. However, they are rarely identical. The wording is often different, suggesting they may have come from an independent tradition rather than simply copying the biblical Gospels. Because of this, some researchers believe the Gospel of Thomas may preserve very early oral traditions connected to the historical Jesus. Even more intriguing are the sayings found nowhere else. Some are deeply symbolic and difficult to interpret. One famous example reads, "Blessed is the lion that a human eats, so the lion becomes human. And cursed is the human whom a lion eats, and the lion becomes human." Passages like this are far more mysterious than the parables found in the New Testament. Instead of offering straightforward lessons, they invite careful reflection, almost as though they are puzzles meant to uncover hidden spiritual truths.
The Gospel of Thomas has fascinated scholars because it combines familiar teachings with entirely new ones. But if parts of it may preserve ancient traditions, why wasn't it included in the Bible? One major reason is that several of its unique sayings closely reflect Gnostic beliefs. For example, one passage instructs believers to say they have come from the place where the light first existed. On the surface, that may sound harmless, but within the Gnostic worldview, it points to the belief that every human soul originates from the divine realm and carries a hidden spark of heavenly light waiting to be awakened. Ideas like these sharply contrasted with the beliefs that became central to mainstream Christianity and helped separate this book from the emerging biblical canon. There was another important difference as well. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus is presented primarily as a teacher who reveals hidden wisdom about reality. The focus is on gaining spiritual knowledge rather than on his sacrificial death and resurrection. By contrast, the New Testament presents Jesus not only as a teacher, but as the Son of God, whose death and resurrection bring salvation to humanity. Since this defining message is almost entirely absent from the Gospel of Thomas, early Christian leaders did not recognize it as Scripture. Even so, the Gospel of Thomas remains one of the most remarkable discoveries from Nag Hammadi. What's especially interesting is that, unlike many of the other texts found there, historians already knew of its existence long before the manuscripts were uncovered. Before the discovery at Nag Hammadi, only small pieces of the Gospel of Thomas had been found, beginning in the late 19th century. The manuscript uncovered there was the first complete copy ever discovered. Since fragments of the same text had appeared in different locations, many scholars believe it was once widely read among early Christian communities and may even have been considered by some as a candidate for inclusion in the biblical canon. To this day, the Gospel of Thomas continues to spark lively debate, especially among historians searching for clues about the historical Jesus. Yet another Gnostic writing has generated even greater controversy. In the New Testament, Judas Iscariot is remembered as the disciple who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. But what if the betrayal was actually part of Jesus' plan? What if Judas was the only disciple who truly understood his mission? That surprising idea lies at the heart of the Gospel of Judas, a Gnostic text dating to around the 4th century. Unlike the books discovered at Nag Hammadi, this manuscript was found separately in the Egyptian desert, and its own journey to the modern world is almost as remarkable as its contents.
The manuscript became known to collectors during the late 1970s and passed through several owners. Once removed from Egypt's dry climate, however, the fragile papyrus began falling apart. Hoping to preserve it, one owner placed it in a freezer. Sadly, the freezing temperatures only made things worse, damaging the delicate fibers and accelerating the manuscript's decay. Although much of it was lost, enough survived for scholars to reconstruct and translate its message. The Gospel of Judas presents itself as a private conversation between Jesus and Judas during the final days before the crucifixion. Early in the story, the 12 disciples are praying.
But Jesus responds by laughing at them, saying they do not truly understand who he is. Only Judas speaks with confidence, declaring that Jesus comes from the immortal realm of Barbelo. In Gnostic belief, Barbelo is one of the highest divine beings, so by naming her, Judas demonstrates knowledge that the other disciples supposedly lack. According to this text, he alone recognizes Jesus' true heavenly origin. Jesus then separates Judas from the others and reveals hidden mysteries about the universe. He explains the Gnostic view that the material world is ruled by the flawed Creator, while salvation comes through recognizing the divine spark hidden within every person and returning to the pleroma. After revealing these secret teachings, Jesus gives Judas an unexpected assignment. He instructs him to hand him over, explaining that Judas will sacrifice the man that clothes me, meaning the physical body that contains his true spiritual nature. Believing he is carrying out Jesus' wishes, Judas proceeds with the betrayal. When this gospel was introduced to the public, it immediately attracted worldwide attention. Its portrayal of Judas was radically different from the familiar biblical account. Rather than presenting him as a traitor, it casts him as Jesus' most faithful disciple, the only one capable of understanding his true purpose. Even so, most scholars believe the Gospel of Judas was written long after the events it describes, making it difficult to view as reliable history. Nevertheless, it offers valuable insight into how certain Gnostic communities challenged the beliefs of the growing Christian church. By transforming Judas into a misunderstood hero, they reshaped one of the Bible's most infamous figures to reflect their own theology. Alongside the Gospels of Thomas and Judas, many other non-canonical writings expanded the story of Jesus in imaginative ways. One reason these books became popular is that the New Testament leaves large portions of Jesus' early life unexplained. His public ministry begins when he is about 30 years old, leaving many people wondering what his childhood was like. One attempt to answer that question is found in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. Despite sharing a similar name, it has no connection to the Gospel of Thomas. Instead, it tells a series of legendary stories about Jesus as a young boy, and many of them are surprisingly unusual. This book portrays the child Jesus learning to control extraordinary powers, often with unsettling results. In one story, another boy accidentally bumps into him. Angered by the encounter, Jesus curses the child, causing him to die. When nearby children witness what happened and report it, Jesus strikes them with blindness as well. The story changes only after Joseph rebukes him, teaching that such power should be used to help others rather than harm them. Jesus then reverses his actions, restoring the children's sight and bringing the dead boy back to life. It's easy to understand why stories like these were never accepted into the New Testament. This version of Jesus is far removed from the compassionate Savior presented in the canonical Gospels. Even so, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas remained popular for centuries, inspiring numerous medieval illustrations. One of its most famous scenes, in which the young Jesus shapes birds from clay and gives them life, is especially interesting because a similar miracle is also mentioned in the Quran. The infancy Gospel of Thomas is only one example of the imaginative stories that developed outside the Bible. Another remarkable text is the Gospel of Peter, written during the 2nd century. It retells the resurrection of Jesus, but introduces one of the strangest images in early Christian literature: a cross that speaks. The story begins with soldiers standing guard outside Jesus' tomb. Without warning, the tomb opens, and mysterious heavenly figures emerge alongside the risen Jesus, setting the stage for one of the most extraordinary resurrection accounts ever written. Following behind the risen Jesus came the very cross on which he had been crucified. Then the story takes an unforgettable turn. A voice from heaven calls out, asking, "Did you preach to those who sleep?" To everyone's surprise, the answer comes not from Jesus, but from the cross itself. Yes. That single word is all the cross ever says, but the image of a walking, speaking cross is easily one of the most unusual scenes in all of early Christian literature. It's certainly not something you'd expect to find in a retelling of the resurrection. Across the Gnostic writings, Jesus appears in many different forms. In the Gospel of Thomas, he is portrayed as a wise teacher who shares profound spiritual truths. In the Gospel of Judas, he becomes a heavenly revealer who explains the hidden structure of the universe. Despite these differences, one theme remains constant. The Gnostics viewed Jesus primarily as the one who uncovers secret knowledge about reality. Much like Morpheus in The Matrix, the Gnostic Jesus awakens people to what they believed was the truth, that the material world is not ultimate reality, but a deceptive prison created by Yaldabaoth.
According to these writings, salvation comes through awakening to that hidden truth. Yet Judas and Thomas were not the only figures said to receive this secret wisdom. Some Gnostic texts go even further, suggesting that Jesus' closest and most trusted follower was not one of the 12 disciples at all, but Mary Magdalene. Few figures in Christian history have sparked as much fascination as Mary Magdalene, particularly because of her relationship with Jesus. The New Testament presents her as a devoted follower and one of the first witnesses to the resurrection. Although later traditions often identified her as a repentant prostitute, the Bible never explicitly makes that connection. Today, many scholars believe she may have held a far more important role among Jesus' disciples than was once assumed. Mary appears in several Gnostic writings, especially the Gospel of Philip, which contains a damaged passage describing her as Jesus' companion, saying he loved her more than the other disciples and often kissed her. Because key words are missing, the passage has fueled decades of debate. Some see it as evidence of a romantic relationship, while others argue the word companion can simply mean a close associate, and that a kiss was a common sign of fellowship in early Christianity. Whatever the intended meaning, the text clearly presents Mary as one of Jesus' closest followers. Her importance is highlighted even further in the Gospel of Mary, where Jesus privately reveals profound spiritual truths to her, including the soul's journey after death. When she shares these teachings, the other disciples question why Jesus would entrust such knowledge to a woman, revealing both their jealousy and Mary's unique status. These writings have led many historians to explore whether some Gnostic communities granted women greater spiritual authority than other early Christian groups. The Gnostic Gospels also reveal how their followers lived. Believing the material world was flawed, many practiced strict discipline through fasting, celibacy, and simple living. Some formed small communities in remote places like the Egyptian desert, dedicating themselves to prayer and spiritual growth. One of their most mysterious rituals, described in the Gospel of Philip, was the bridal chamber, a symbolic ceremony many scholars believe
represented the union of the soul with the divine. Their worship also included hymns and sacred vowel chants, intended to deepen spiritual awareness beyond ordinary words. Together, these writings reveal a mystical branch of early Christianity that emphasized personal spiritual experience and hidden knowledge. Thanks to the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library, these forgotten voices have been preserved after centuries of silence. Despite its influence, Gnosticism gradually faded as Orthodox Christianity became dominant. During the 2nd century, Christians held many different beliefs, and there was no officially recognized New Testament. Gnostic groups taught that salvation came through secret knowledge, while emerging Orthodox Christians centered their faith on the apostles' writings, proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God whose death and resurrection brought salvation. One of Gnosticism's strongest opponents was Irenaeus of Lyons. In his work against heresies, he rejected Gnostic teachings and defended the authority of the writings that would become the New Testament.
His influence, combined with the Church's organized structure, helped Orthodox Christianity grow, while the more secretive Gnostic communities steadily declined. The Church's position became even stronger in the 4th century, after Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. The Council of Nicaea established a unified statement of faith, and in 367 AD, Bishop Athanasius listed the 27 books that now make up the New Testament.
As the biblical canon took shape, Gnostic writings were pushed aside, and many communities disappeared, leaving only hidden collections like those buried at Nag Hammadi. Ironically, Gnosticism helped shape Christianity by forcing early church leaders to define and defend their beliefs. Today, the Gnostic Gospels offer a remarkable glimpse into the diversity of the early Christian world. They remind us that the first centuries of Christianity were filled with competing ideas about Jesus, salvation, and God, preserving a fascinating tradition that history nearly erased.